What's up, my friends? Welcome back to another video, and this is part 9 of our Disney Medley Breakdown series. We're so close to the end now, and thank you so much if you've been watching all the parts 1 to 8 so far. Part 9, we'll be talking about a little bit more detail in the idiomatic considerations when it comes to arranging for the orchestra with virtual instruments. This is exciting stuff because, sample libraries can do a lot of stuff, but at the same time, to make an arrangement sound realistic, you also want to consider what the real life instruments can do and cannot do. So we'll talk about that here today. Before we do that though, I want to give you my orchestration essentials guide in case you don't have it yet. It's totally free, and it basically goes through my 5-step process when it comes to arranging a mockup from start to finish, and goes through every single consideration, like what instruments to put in, how to view it from a general perspective, and then drilling down to the specifics. And I want to give that to you 100% free. Just click the link below. It'll take you there where you can download it right away, and you can read it within, I don't know, a few minutes. It's super digestible, super practical, and I want you to have that as my gift to you for checking out this video today. So let's dive into some of the idiomatic considerations. The first thing I want to talk about is very, very obvious, and that is breathing. So just as a quick overview, string players generally can play long lines, especially sustained lines and all that, without needing to breathe, because their method of producing sound doesn't require their mouth or their physical breath, right? Whereas the woodwinds and the brass do, you have to give them, a lot of room to breathe, especially if they're playing extended lines and melodies. But for the strings, they're very flexible because they actually don't need that. So what I tend to do myself is set the foundation of a piece or a track up using the strings in this style specifically. So you can see here, I have a lot of strings going on. The only time I'm not using them is maybe when I want a softer moment, very, very intimate, like maybe just harp and a flute, or maybe, something very, very quiet that doesn't need the strings because the strings are playing for most of it anyway. So having that contrast is obviously very important. So that's one thing you want to consider. And if you take a look here at the, I'll go to the MIDI here. So the this is the woodwinds. So from here to right here. Okay, let's expand that a little bit. So if you take a look at the MIDI data, there is not very much happening here, right? We have the instruments playing throughout, but they're playing for maybe, 30% of the arrangement, whereas the strings are playing for more like 90%. The woodwinds in totaled don't really play too much, unless they're playing like a solo featured line, right? But let's have a listen to the beginning. This is the intro. There's the oboe, solo bassoon and flute come in, and this is one phrase. And then after the phrase, you want to let them breathe, take a break. Now we have the solo English horn and the solo clarinet coming in. And notice actually right after this first mini phrase, right here, I kind of cut off the MIDI right there. So it gives them a very slight chance to breathe. Right? And then they breathe again, even though it's a repeated note, so you're going to have to overlap the MIDI, or at least have them very close to each other. But having that little break there gives them a chance to breathe as well. And then here, I'm kind of carrying on the line to the end of the phrase. So let's hear that one more time. So it holds, breathe, keep going, quick breath. Right? Now they can definitely play this easily with one breath. And rest. Now it's the flute's turn. It's clarinet counter melody. See the little breath there in the flute as well. Or that's the oboe actually, but same idea. So the flute MIDI data is actually down here. Right? And then it takes a break. So that's the idea, right? So within a single line, what you're trying to do is actually mimic either a vocalist who would be singing that line, or think about from the performer's perspective of the woodwind or the brass. So it's the same idea. Whenever you have a longer line, you want to find those places for the instrumentalist to breathe. Now, in mockup land, you can get away with breaking this rule when it comes to simple counter melodies or pads that are kind of hidden underneath the main melody, because no one's really going to be able to tell, oh, that pad note right there, that was holding way too long, and the composer, the arranger, didn't give that person enough room to breathe. No, they're going to be listening to the main melody, which is the most important thing. You know what I mean? So Generally, when it comes to background textures or counter melodies, you don't have to worry too much about that, especially when I'm working with virtual instruments. But it's still a general consideration you want to keep in mind. So same idea here with the brass. Let's take a more general look. So brass starts from here to here. These are my brass tracks. So here, case in point, right? I have my 2 horns patch here playing pads. So have a listen to this. So now the 2 horns are just playing, they're just filling in the harmonic holes just above middle C. And I don't have to worry too much about creating breath marks here or places to breathe, because if there were actually 4 players playing with each other, they would kind of decide on their own where to breathe while the other player is still sustaining the note, you know? So they're providing more of a background texture. It doesn't matter as much, you know, where to put those breath marks. It only matters really when it comes to, you know, melody and really featured lines. So that's something to really keep in mind there. The other thing I want to talk about in this video, in terms of idiomatic considerations, is expression and dynamics. So a lot of players, a lot of musicians, especially professional musicians, have complete control over how loud and how quiet they can play their instruments and how much they can get out of their instruments, right? So generally, when it comes to an arrangement like this, that is, you know, that has a lot of quiet dynamics, intimate moments, and then soaring, passionate moments, you want to make use of those dynamics and all of the expression contained within those samples. So just a very quick example here. Let's say When You Wish Upon a Star. I have the alto flute playing here, and if we take a look at the MIDI data, you can see I've tried to get the quiet parts, and I've tried to ride the mod wheel so it kind of matches the shape of the phrase. Let's do this one more time. So it starts off quietly, rises up, and decrescendo, crescendo, taper, start a little more, and then start to decrescendo as the phrase decreases, up, down, and then up a little bit, and now it's going to make room for the strings. And they really come in here. So now let's look at the strings data, violins especially. Decrescendo. And it kind of tapers down here. See, it's very quiet. And now the string support. It starts to crescendo. And now it's going to take over the melody here, so more dynamic. So what generally happens is a lot of people, I think, are confused when it comes to figuring out what kind of modulation curves to put with a single part. And the best way to think about it is identifying where the high points and the low points in your phrase are. So that kind of makes you really listen critically and ask yourself, like, where would I want the emotion of the phrase to lead towards? Like, where is it climaxing in terms of the emotion? Where is it more subtle and calm? So if you were to ask me, like this line here, I would definitely say these C's are kind of the high points there, right? They're really rising to that top, and then it's kind of working its way down gradually. So it makes sense for the modulation data to kind of peak there generally, and then kind of come down, right? And here you notice I didn't peak especially, but it's a very subtle thing, but you still have the general dynamic at a forte-ish, right? Then you rise back up for the second phrase, and then when it goes to the second half, when it goes to reflection, same idea here. Lots of high MIDI data because the violins are more expressive there. So taking advantage of the baked-in performances and how intense it can be, that's a determining factor of what will make an arrangement sound realistic. A lot of amateur arrangements tend to only use like one dynamic layer that's recorded or included in the library. And so that's the benefit of purchasing libraries that are a little more expensive, a little more sampled in depth, is that you get access to multiple dynamic layers. I've done videos on that as well, like what types of libraries you should consider, but that's just something you want to think about as well. And the last and final thing I wanted to talk about is kind of a general concept, but it's staying within the strength of the practical range of the instrument. So a lot of instruments have a pretty wide range when it comes to the lowest note and the highest notes, right? However, the instrument doesn't necessarily sound very good in every single note of that register or of the entire range. Usually the center of that range or the comfortable range is probably where it's going to excel in terms of ease of playing for the performer and also the best like timbre of sound that will produce from the instrument, you know? So if you want to play like a high line in general, you want to consider what instruments can play high lines easily and speak very easily. So, violins, flutes, clarinets, maybe oboe a little bit, trumpets, depending on the context of the instrument or the music, then you can decide what instrument you want to use, but you want to start by knowing the ranges of those instruments. So you usually don't want the instrumentalist to be straining other instruments to get the notes out. So that's definitely something to consider as well. So, for example, like the bassoon has a quite a wide range going super low to high, but it's never going to go as high as like a flute's upper range. So you wouldn't want to put a bassoon in like a flute's line if you want something super high. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. And that's kind of the third thing. But I think to really understand that, you can just watch a course, listen to a lot of music, read an orchestration book like Adler or whatever, Rimsky-Korsakov. Lots of options out there for you to learn the practical ranges of the instruments. But that's something you do want to consider as well. So that's why piano sketches are also really important, because you can find out like which octave do I want this melody to play in? Okay, I kind of like it around middle C. All right, so now I'll think about which instruments I want to consider to play that melody. It's probably not going to be a flute because that can be super high and the low register is pretty weak. It's probably not going to be a tuba because the strength of the tuba is super low or lower, and the highest note is around like the middle C register, right? And then so that kind of leaves like maybe cello, that maybe leaves bassoon, that leaves violas, whatever. And so you can think about it that way. So start from your sketch first, think about your core ideas, and then kind of assign certain instruments to it afterwards. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So those are kind of three things I wanted to cover. Breathing considerations for different instrumentalists, taking advantage of the different dynamics and being super expressive, creating contrast within your arrangement, and finally understanding the strength of the practical ranges of the instrument and where to write your lines and your themes within the comfortable ranges of the instruments. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. Thank you so much for watching. And again, if you don't have that Orchestration Essentials guide, I want to give it to you totally free. It just goes over my personal workflow when it comes to creating an arrangement from start to finish. Super practical and easy to read. I want to give that to you totally free. So click the link below. It'll take you straight there. And again, it's my gift to you for checking out this video today. Really appreciate it. I'll catch you in the final part in the next video, and I'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.